All right, so to wrap up our discussion of memory, we're going to talk about chapter 8, which is everyday memory and memory errors. So, when it comes to our memory, we have autobiographical memories. These are memories for specific experiences from our life, which can include both episodic memories and semantic memories. Episodic memories are when we, of course, remember those episodes, those specific things that happened in our lives. And our semantic memories, of course, are those things related to factual knowledge that we remember. Autobiographical memory can also involve mental time travel and multi-dimensional things such as spatial, emotional, and sensory memory. The sensory component of autobiographical memory has been studied by Greenberg and Rubin in 2003. This is when they looked at patients who couldn't recognize objects and how they experience loss of autobiographical information. So their visual experience played a role in their ability to form and retrieve memories. Autobiographical memory has also been studied with Cabeza and coworkers in 2004. So that was kind of a time when memory work was pretty popular. And they compared brain activation, which was caused by autobiographical memory, and lab memories. And as you can see in the example, these are some of the objects they used, and participants were able to view those things. They took their own photos, and then they had photos taken by somebody else to study how autobiographical memory works. So, in both types of the photos, they noticed that similar areas of the brain were activated, such as the medial temporal lobe and the parietal lobe. And then when they were looking at their own photos, it was more activation in the prefrontal cortex and in the hippocampus. And that tells us that our autobiographical memory is very rich. Over the course of our lifespan, people remember things differently. We tend to remember significant events from our life. We also tend to remember highly emotional events, and we remember points of transition. When participants over the age of 40 were asked to recall events in their earlier life, their memory was high for recent events and for events that occurred during their adolescence and early adulthood between the ages of 10 and 30. And we call that the reminiscence bump, when people are able to remember that information that mostly occurred between 10 and 30 years of age. So when we start to think about the reminiscent bump, we have to look at some things that are taking place during that time of life. Self image is a big thing. And, when you're between the ages of 10 and 30, you are developing your self image. Cognition plays a big role because that's when you start to encode and think about things more complexly. And then there's also the cultural life script, which is how we culturally have shared experiences, which structure our recall. When it comes to our self image hypothesis, our memory is enhanced for events that occur as a person's self image or life identity is formed, like in the early 20s and the teen years. People assume identities during adolescence and young adulthood. That's how you're becoming who you are. There could also be rapid changes in who you are because as children develop, of course, when you're younger and in high school, your development might be based on more of who's around you. And then in adulthood, you might sort of come into your own. There's also this idea of cognitive hypothesis, which says that encoding is better during periods of rapid change that are followed by stability. And this evidence from those who immigrated to the United States after young adulthood indicates that the reminiscent bump is shifted. The cultural life script hypothesis says that each person has a personal life story and an understanding of culturally expected events. And those personal events are easy to recall when they fit into the cultural life script. Emotional events can also be more easily and vividly remembered because they're emotional to us. They stand out to us. Emotion helps improve our memory and becomes greater with time. This could also enhance our consolidation. Brain activity is active in the amygdala, which is our fight or flight system. And our tendency to attend to a weapon during a crime is also something that could cause an emotional event. So if I ask all of you to think back to your very first memory, the thing you remember, the first thing that you can remember about your life, chances are that thing that you remember was probably an emotional event. Even if all you have is a flashback memory of that event, you were probably happy or sad or something like that. And just as I mentioned, flashbulb memories, a flashbulb memory is a memory for a circumstance that surrounds something shocking and highly charged. Now, you won't remember the whole memory, the whole experience, but you probably can see a flashback. Most of you probably remember if you were where you were during the 9/11 terror attacks. I know that I remember where I was, and I remember what I found out about that. The Kennedy assassination. Most people remember where they were and what they were doing when that happened. When the Challenger exploded, many people remember that day, and it might just be a flash. They don't remember what happens before or after the event, but they remember the event. It's highly emotional, it's vivid, it can be very detailed. Flashbulb memories are not photographic memories because they can change with the passage of time, but it's like you just remember a moment something happened. So there's been some research over flashbulb memories that tell us that repeated recall of an event can sort of change the way a person looks at something. And these memories can sometimes be inaccurate or lacking in detail, even though participants will say that they're confident and that their memories are very vivid. Chances are that their memories of the event could be impacted by other things they've seen or things they've heard from other people. The narrative rehearsal hypothesis says that when we repeatedly view or hear of an event through TV, the newspaper, radio, talking with others, that could create errors in our own memory, in our own experience of the event. So, memory is what actually happens and a person's knowledge of what actually happened, their experiences and their expectations. So, in Bartlett's War of the Ghost experiments, he had participants attempt to remember a story from a different culture, and then he had them repeat reproduction of that. And during the results of his study, he noticed that over time, reproduction became shorter. It had omissions and inaccuracies, and the story was even changed to make it more consistent with their own culture. Because we, this idea of a sort of a constructivist memory, that we can create false memories based on our own experiences of something. Source monitoring involves source memory, which is where we have a process of determining the origin of our memory. Like we try to figure out, well, how do we learn that? I don't know how I know it, but I just know I know it. And then also source monitoring error, which is when we misidentify the source of our memory. I thought I learned this from my parents, but perhaps I learned it in school. And then cryptomnesia, which is an unconscious plagiarism of another person's work due to a lack of recognition of its original source. So sometimes we take credit for things because we don't remember where we learned them. So Jacoby and coworkers in 1989 did a study on source monitoring. And after 24 hours, some non-famous names were misidentified as famous. And the explanation for that is that some non-famous names were familiar and the participants misattributed that to the source of familiarity. So they'd heard the name before and they assumed it must be the name of a celebrity. But they failed to identify the source as a list that had been previously read the day before. The illusory truth effect says that we have enhanced probability of evaluating a statement if it's true after repeated presentation. This typically occurs due to fluency or familiarity with the information. It could also be related to the propaganda effect, which is both a result from stimulus repetition. When we make inferences, we have to make educated guesses about a situation. Our memory can be influenced by inferences that people make based on their own experiences, and they didn't really happen. We have pragmatic inferences, which are based on knowledge gained through experience, and this involves information that is implied by or is consistent with what is to be remembered but not explicitly stated. We also all have schemas and scripts that we live by. Those things influence our memory. So when we talk about schemas, we start to think about those thoughts, those ideas about life that we have based on our own experience. So our memories can include information that was not actually experienced, but inferred because it was expected and consistent with what we believed should happen. This sort of constructive nature of memory can lead to errors. It can lead to false memories. A script is a conception of a sequence of actions that usually occurs during a particular experience, like going to a restaurant or playing tennis. Sometimes our schemas, which is our knowledge about a situation, can be influenced by that. So, what are some advantages of constructive memories? Well, sometimes it allows us to fill in the blanks. Like in our mind, if we have these mental blanks that exist, we want to make sense of those situations. Our cognition can also be creative. So, it's an exercise in creativity. It helps us practice our understanding of language, solving problems, and making decisions. But the disadvantages, which are pretty big, is that we're going to make some errors and we can misattribute the source of information. We have to really think about, did it actually happen or did we infer it occurred? The misinformation effect is misleading information that's presented after someone witnessed an event and how that can change how that person later describes the event. And this can happen, depending on a person's vantage point. We all see things from different perspectives and can add misinformation. So Elizabeth Loftus, and her video has been linked under the resources, and I also put in an announcement. She's kind of the guru of false memories and misinformation. She started doing her work in 1975, and she had participants look at slides of a traffic accident with a stop sign, and she also had a yield sign. And participants remembered what they heard, that there was a yield sign, but they didn't remember what they saw, which is that there was a stop sign. She did further research as well, which said that if you hear a smashed or hit in the description of a car accident, hearing those words will make you think that something actually occurred. Sometimes we can also have source monitoring errors, which is a failure to distinguish the source of information. We don't know where it comes from. Lindsay in 1990 gave participants a story, and 2 days later changed some of the details, and they were told to ignore the changes. She used the same voice for both stories so that there wouldn't be source monitoring errors. And she changed the voice from male to female, and they did not create as many errors. False memories have also been studied by Hyman and coworkers in 1995. Participants' parents were given descriptions of childhood experiences. Those participants had conversations about their experiences with the experimenter, and the experimenter added events to that. And later, when they discussed it, the participant actually remembered those events the experimenter told them happened, even though they actually didn't happen. And the research over false memories is so important because we never want to create a false memory. Hopefully, the lab you complete this week will help you understand how easily, depending on how things are phrased, that can happen. We can also have errors in eyewitness testimony. And we know that eyewitness testimony is primarily used in legal situations. That's where we've got testimony by an eyewitness to a crime about what he or she saw. And eyewitnesses are necessary. We need them to corroborate a victim's story. And sometimes we need them, especially if there's no video evidence. But one thing that we've learned is that people assume that what they see, they are able to remember accurately. But eyewitness testimony can be inaccurate. We can mistakenly identify the wrong person, like the video you'll see this week. We can also have false memories. So there's also been lots of stories on errors in eyewitness testimony. I really want you guys to watch that video this week. Wells and Bradfield did a study in 1998 where they had participants view a security videotape with a gunman for 8 seconds. They identified someone as the gunman, and the actual gunman's picture wasn't presented. But when that happens, people try to find the right person, even if that person isn't there. Attention can be narrowed whenever we're presented with specific stimuli. And weapons can be the focus when they really shouldn't be. So sometimes how people are asked things can lead to suggestion that could confirm things for them. So we have to be confident in our memories, but realize that they could be influenced by how we're questioned. So how can we improve eyewitness testimony? Because the judicial system still needs it. We have to inform our witnesses that the perpetrator might not be in the lineup. We have to use fillers in a lineup to that are kind of similar to the suspect. We have to use sequential presentation. So don't show everybody all at the same time. We have to show them one at a time so that the person can compare their memory of the person with the picture they see at the moment instead of comparing them to each other. And we also have to improve interviewing techniques. We've got to have a cognitive interview where the person is asked questions that aren't leading. So hopefully this information all helps you guys understand a little bit more about memory and how sometimes our memories aren't as accurate as we would like them to be.